Hi everyone, my name's Victoria Purman. I'm the author of The Nurses' War, which you can see down. Oh, we're all back to front there, which you can see there with my most recent release, The Women's Pages. I'm really happy to be taking over Better Reading Live tonight to tell you all about my book, which is officially out today. I've been told that people are buying it and it's been downloaded onto devices, so it's definitely out there in the world. And if it's not out there today, it should be tomorrow and over the next few days, depending on how busy the booksellers are. I'm going to tell you a little bit about this book, but I want to also say I've got a column down the side of my screen where I can see your questions. Hi, Wendy. How are you? Thanks for coming along. Please ask me questions. I will answer them as we go through. I really want to have a chat with you, and I'll respond to those. But we'll just sort of we'll wait a couple of minutes till everyone comes on. But Wendy, I can see you're here. Where are you from, Wendy? And anyone else who's here, let me know where you're from. Which state? If you're in Adelaide, let me know which suburb, because I'll probably know it. It's so great to do these things. Oh, hi, Tanya. How are you? Oh, you were commenting on my Facebook page today. Thank you so much. Hi, Carolyn. How are you? Great to see you all here. I'll start with a little bit about the women's pages. Oh, Sharon's here. Hi, Sharon. Don't forget to say where you're from. Mark says evening from Canberra. Hi, Mark. How are you? Thanks for coming along. Oh, Deborah, that's very kind. You are an amazing author. Well, I have amazing readers. Oh, Angela's from Moana. I know where that is, Angela. You're a South Australian like me. I have amazing readers, and I'm so grateful that you've all been so loyal to me. I'll just cover up my cleavage. That you've all been so loyal to me with all of my books. It's been a little while between books because COVID got in the way. But I'll tell you a little bit about The Nurses' War. But I've just seen Tanya's in Mooroopna. I have driven through Mooroopna, Tanya. Heather's from Mile End. Alona says, love the women's pages. Oh, Wendy's from Wagga. Hi, Wendy. Hi to Wagga. Claire is in WA. Chanel is from Hayward in Victoria. Lita's from Sydney. We've got people from all over. Or Julie's holidaying in the Hunter. That's wine country, isn't it, Julie? Oh, and Jessie. Hi, Jessie. How are you? Oh, and Melissa's in Ipswich, Queensland. Enjoy the women's pages. Thank you, Melissa. I hope it's drier where you are. I've kind of, it seems to be raining on the eastern seaboard constantly. And the poor people of Lismore having to evacuate again today is just awful. TJ's from Tamworth. I love the way you combine history and your novels. Thank you. I must get to Tamworth one day because I do love country music. And Valerie's from Canberra. Deborah's from Kew in the mid-north coast, New South Wales. Victoria Brookman, one of my fellow authors. Hi, Victoria. How you going? I really like her, not just because she's got the same name as me, but that could have something to do with it. Marion's from Lilydale in Victoria. Oh, hi, everyone. I really appreciate you coming along, especially on a night when the Shane Warne tribute is on TV. It's being watched in there by the rest of the members of the household. Big cricket fans here. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Nurses' War. In 1915, an Australian family who were living in Middlesex in the UK in a village called Hairfield donated their manor house to the Australian Ministry of Defence for use as a hospital and a kind of recuperation place for Australian soldiers. They were an amazing family, the Billiard Leaks. And although the novel's not really about them, there's some great history. Letitia Leak was an heiress from Glencoe in the southeast of South Australia. And she inherited $16 million in today's money back then. And she actually had a legal battle with one of her uncles for the money. And she won that. They went to court. She won the money. She then married a lawyer from Sydney, Charles Billiard. And they hyphenated their name back in the late 1800s, which is really unusual. And they kind of fled Australia, clearly left a bad taste in their mouth, and went to live in Hairfield. So when the war broke out, they had grown-up sons. Two were serving, and they decided to hand over their house to the Defence Department, as I mentioned, for a hospital for Australian soldiers. And at that time, people only thought the war was going to go to about Christmas 1915, and that it would be nice if the soldiers were injured, they could go to England and stay at the house um, and recuperate. And Dex, who's my trusty sidekick, we have a photo of the manor house, which was called Hairfield House. So I'm going to disappear for a couple of secs. Hello, everyone. Oh, Carol's just started. The nurses were on Can't Put It Down. Hi, Judy from Tweed Heads. Hi, Diane from Mackay in Queensland. Hi, Anne from Sydney. Oh, sorry, Dex, could you put that back up again? I got distracted by everybody. So this is the manor house called Hairfield Park where the billiard leaks lived. And they handed it over lock, stock and barrel. They moved into a much smaller place in the village. And it became a 50-bed hospital, staffed by nurses like this. And Dex, if you could go to that's a great shot. So these were the original, there were 5 nurses and a matron who went over. One of the nurses was sick for this photo. And these were the original Australian nurses who went to Middlesex on a boat, took 6 weeks, to work at the hospital and actually establish it. So they had to convert it from that manor house into the hospital, because the billiard leaks had specified that the hospital should be staffed by Australians for the treatment of Australians, which was unusual. It was the only hospital like that of its kind in England. So that house became Hairfield Hospital, or officially the #1 auxiliary Australian hospital, but it just became known as Hairfield Hospital. So these women, and this is the story I tell in the Nurses' War. Matron Grey is the one in the dark uniform. She's sitting at the front, and the others are around her. They're the nurses. Now, I've fictionalised my nurses, but Matron Grey appears in the novel as a tribute to her. She was an incredible woman. She won the Royal Red. I'm just reading the details so I get it right. She won the Royal Red Cross first class in the birthday honours of June 1916, and later that year she left England and went to France to work in a frontline hospital. And she was invested CBE in 1919. And after the war, she returned to Australia and established a rehabilitation hospital in Victoria. So she was a pretty formidable woman. So I wanted to honour her. So Matron Grey appears in the book. But I've created these 4 other nurses who go to England to set up the hospital. And my main nurse is Cora Barker. She's the Australian whose story I tell. And she lands over there. She's in her 30s and she's determined to do something for the war effort. And she's a nurse back in Adelaide. So that's her. That's where her efforts go. So these nurses arrived in England in May 1915, thinking that by Christmas 1915 they would all be home because the war would only go for 6 months. Well, it didn't go for 6 months, as we know. And the book portrays that whole period right from 1915 when they land to the end of the war. And then there's a bit of a prologue, or sort of an epilogue at the end, rather, where we find out what happened to Cora. So she's my Australian character. And on the flip side, I have an English lass from the village of Hairfield who I've created, but she's based on someone real, called Jessie. And she's a seamstress with her mother. And she volunteers at the hospital. The village of Hairfield really embraced the Australians because they were very respectful that they had come all this way to England to protect England from the Germans, the enemy. So they were very respectful, and the soldiers hung out in the village green and were seen in all the shops and especially the pubs because they're Australians. Let's not deny it. So she volunteers and falls in love with an injured Australian soldier. Now that man in the book is Bert Mott. He's actually based on my husband's great uncle, Bert Mobbs, who was injured at Gallipoli, went to England to a hospital. He didn't go to Hairfield, but that's why I've slightly changed his name. So he recovered in England. He met a woman called Jessie Higginson, and they got engaged. And then he went back to France. And I've used that as the basis for Jessie's love story with Bert, that he recovers. And this was the irony for these men. when they were injured, they went to hospitals. If they weren't going to recover sufficiently to go back to war, um, they were free to go home. But sometimes they weren't even well enough to go home immediately, so they had to recover in Hairfield. If they did recover, they were sent back to the war. So there's really poignant scenes in the book where he realizes and she realizes that he's well enough to go back to the battle. And because the book covers the span of the war, we see the devastating injuries of the Somme and Ypres and all those big battles we know about. But when things got so bad, Harefield didn't become a rehabilitation hospital. They were literally taking the injured soldiers who were put on trains and sent across the channel because there was so much injury and so much death on the battlefront. They couldn't even treat them. They would wrap their wounds and basically send them on. So the nurses working at Harefield saw the worst of the battle injuries, even though they weren't near the battlefront. So I've created these two women, and I put them in 1915 and World War One, with lives and a community of nurses. And we meet Jessie's younger brother and her mother, and her best friend, who's becomes a female post woman, a postie, because so many women did those jobs in World War One. And those of you who've read The Land Girls know it was the same here, that women took up those posts because the men were all away. So there's this lovely. It was such fun to create this world of women, and recreate this little village. And the book will take you through ups and downs, and people have told me they've cried, which authors always love, although I don't want to upset people. But how can you write about World War One without it being an upsetting thing, and to include some of the devastating injuries and events of the war? So that's kind of in a nutshell the Nurses' War. But I'm going to go to some questions because there are lots, and we've got half an hour. So hi from Canberra, says Annie, hoping to get a copy this weekend. Thank you, Annie. Yvonne says hi. Chanel Ferguson says, how cool is history? I couldn't agree more. I absolutely love history. And there's another connection to Adelaide and to my family, actually, in a roundabout way, about when the first soldier died, and I portray this in the book, at Harefield Hospital. He was buried at St Mary's Churchyard in the village, and every Australian who died in the hospital was buried there. And it's now a national historic site. It's run by the War Graves Commission, and it's looked after. There was the funeral cortege went right down the main street of Harefield, and everyone in the village turned out. And there are some beautiful old photos of the funeral, and I use those as the basis for the scene in the book where that happens. And it was very somber, and the local villagers, as I mentioned, were so grateful that Australians had come so far and made this ultimate sacrifice. The principal of the primary school in Harefield Village ran inside and took the Union Jack flag that had flown on the flagpole in the schoolyard and went out to the hearse. Well, it was a horse-drawn hearse, I suppose, and laid the Union Jack on the coffin of the first Australian to die at Harefield Hospital, to be buried in St Mary's. And that became known as the Harefield Flag. And every soldier and nurse, there was one nurse who died there of the flu towards the end of the war, every coffin was draped with this particular flag. And after the war, the village weren't quite sure what to do with it, but they knew it was sacred to Australians. So they sent it to Adelaide High School, because Adelaide High School had put together aid packages and sent them to Harefield for soldiers. And it was a very common thing throughout Australia. And that flag now has been restored and is in Adelaide High School, where my three sons went to school. And I was chair of the governing council there for a few years too. So we've had that connection as well. So I'd always heard about the Harefield flag, but it didn't click with me what it was until I started investigating Harefield Hospital. So there's that little piece of history as well, and that connection, which is just all these signs came to me about the fact that this would be a terrific story to tell. And I hope you agree. I just couldn't ignore all these things in my head. And, when we cast around as authors to find the next book, so sometimes ideas come from places that, we don't even know, and you put two and two together and come up with the idea, and that's how it happened. Um, Alona says, Lynn Kelly, are you buying this novel or am I? Well, you know what my answer is going to be. You both buy the novel. Wendy says, I remember the red capes. One could only wonder how you worked in those veils. Oh, I know. Imagine keeping everything clean. I mean, there was injury. There was a lot of blood, I'm sure. I suppose you could bleach them, but oh God. They were still wearing corsets under those uniforms too, by the way. Lynn Parsons says, I have just finished the women's pages. My mother grew up in Rabaul, was evacuated at age 21 and subsequently lost her father, 15-year-old brother and uncle, all civilians on the Montevideo Maru. Thank you, Lynn. That was such a heartbreaking story to tell. And something I couldn't talk about when I toured with that book, because those who don't know what happened to the Montevideo Maru, I didn't want to give that plot point away. But for those who've read it, you'll know that this ship was sunk and everyone on board was killed. Before COVID, everything seems like pre or post COVID, but before COVID, when I was writing the women's pages, I was at the War Memorial looking at letters that soldiers or prisoners of war who were on that ship had sent home to Australia. Their families had donated them to the War Memorial. So I was sitting at a desk holding the letters that had been written by these people who had died, and I was taking notes about what was in the letters. And it was very profound, actually, to think these things had travelled so far and were telling such positive stories. For instance, don't worry, mother, I'm good and the Japanese are treating me well. That wasn't the case, but they did not want their parents to. This man didn't want his mother to worry. It was just so heartbreaking. So I'm sitting at a desk at the War Memorial looking at this, and my husband's off. There's a kind of public computer with a volunteer, and you can sit there and they will help you find war records of your family. And I mean, my family, I'm first generation, so all my family were from somewhere else. But my husband's fifth generation, where I steal all the historical stories from. I steal them from his family with their permission. But he was sitting at the computer with a volunteer and he said, oh, my two uncles served in World War II. And the volunteer entered their names and outspat them from the printer information about their service, which is a great thing to do if you do have relatives. You can see their battalions, where they served, any commendations, any trouble they got into. I think one of his uncles was demoted. I don't know, maybe he was out too late one night or something. And then the volunteer said there's another mobs here as well from World War One. And everyone knew that was Uncle Bert Mobbs, who had served in World War One. He enlisted from Murray Bridge here in Adelaide. So Stephen said, oh yeah, well, I'll have those too. And they're in an envelope, and we went out for dinner, and then we went back to the hotel and we looked through, and I've got them here. I don't know if you can see that. See the beautiful handwriting. That's from 19 Wellington Road, Handsworth Wood, Birmingham, from a woman called Jessie Higginson. There are a number of handwritten letters in Bert Mobb's army file, and they were letters asking what had happened to him. And that just broke my heart, that someone had loved him and wanted to find out what had happened. I really don't want to give too much away, but I did use the letters verbatim in the book that the real Jessie Higginson had written to the Ministry of Defence to find out, and that was just so. Again, I saw these, and I thought, this is a book somewhere. There's a story in this, and so that's the connection to the women's pages. Going back to the Montevideo Maru, Lynn, thank you for bringing that up. For those who don't know it, if you read I don't want to go read the women's pages. You'll find all out about it, but Google it if you're curious, because it's just such a tragic story and so many tragic wartime stories. Tanya Michelle says, I'm new to your books, Victoria. However, I've read such great reviews. I look forward to your new release and a heartfelt congratulations. I'm trying to get my hands on the Land Girls. Looking forward to finding either too. Thank you so much, Tanya. Booktopia has them if your local bookstore doesn't have them. The chains might not have them anymore just because they're a few years old now, but Booktopia definitely has them. Or ask your local bookshop to order them in. They'll do that for you. I'm just going to scroll down. Wendy says, my introduction to your books was The Last of the Bonegilla Girls. Oh, thank you. That I loved writing that, and that was the story about my family's journey to Australia, really. And I was really honoured to portray that story for the children of other migrants too, who didn't know the history and didn't know what the circumstances as to how their families came to be here. Joy Bell says, loved Land Girls. Thank you so much. I've loved writing all of them. Sharon Hill says, all your books have beautiful covers. Do you have much input into the covers? Well, a little. But I kind of put it in the hands of my publisher because they are experts at knowing what works and what represents the story. I have a deal with my publisher, Jo, that when she sends me the cover she's happy with, that I cry. And it works every time. When I got the final cover of the women's pages, I immediately looked at the shoes. You'll be able to see them there because they're gorgeous. And it's really subtle details like the flowers in the back of the table are waratahs, which are the New South Wales state flower. Correct me, any New South Wales people who are here. And that was replaced in the sort of stock image, and it just beautifully picks up her lipstick and the jacket and the clothes suit the era. I just love that. And the nurses wore, when I saw that it was version 17, so a lot of work goes into getting the right image, the right typeface on it. Is it too bright? I'll give you a little inside tip too. The original nurse's bag had a red cross on it, and my son came into me because I was showing the family, and he said, I think it's really dodgy to use the red cross if you're not actually the Red Cross. So we got a bit worried and thought, we don't want to offend the Red Cross. They're just marvelous organisation. So we did a bit of research, and we changed the Red Cross to a white cross. Now, red would have looked fabulous with the red poppies there, but again, we just wanted to do the right thing, and it's a book about the war, and we didn't want to, we just didn't want to do the wrong thing. We just felt more comfortable making sure that we respected that organisation. So that was version 17. So a lot of work goes into covers. You wouldn't believe it. Some covers are beautiful. They just don't suit what's inside the pages, and vice versa. I've read fantastic books, and I thought that cover didn't tell me anything about really what was inside, and I think it does it a disservice. So I do defer to the experts and the beautiful work that the graphic designers do at HarperCollins to come up with these covers. And I cry, it's true, every time. I'm just going to go. Helen, hello, Victoria from Narre Warren. Thank you. Hi, Helen. Absolutely love your books. I'm a nurse and just reading books about nursing history. I think there's more comment. Oh, I can't. I'm sorry, Helen, I can't quite get the rest of that comment. It's got ... but it won't let me go into the rest. I hope you think I've paid respect, the appropriate respect to the nurses in the book. I was conscious too that I didn't want them to be sort of angelic figures like, the nurses, because they're real women after all. And I wanted to give them friendships, and I wanted them to laugh with each other. I wanted to create the 4 nurses. I wanted them to be different so that they could bounce off each other as well. So please let me know if you think if I haven't got it right, because that would be really helpful. Chanel says, that's so amazing. If I was a student at Adelaide High, I'd be fascinated by that, and I wholeheartedly agree. The flag is, as I said, it's been restored and it hangs at the school. Every year, the students of Hairfield Primary School still, to this day, have an Anzac Day ceremony, and where they go and put flowers on the graves of all the Australians who were buried at St Mary's Churchyard. So it's still a beautiful connection. And I had hoped to be there. March 2020, you know what happened then. So I didn't get to walk the streets of Hairfield Village, which was really, really difficult, actually. I love going to the places I'm writing about because there's so much you can soak up by just being there. So I'm still hoping to go, but it's definitely a post-book experience. Good evening, Denise. How are you? Look, Denise says, look forward to reading The Nurses' War. Thank you. Jane Tara. Hi, Jane. Thank you for being here. Love The Nurses' War. That's very kind of you. Thank you. Wendy says, I saw the forward promotion of your book some time ago and it sold it for me. Well, excellent. Excellent. And if you follow me on my Facebook or Instagram as Victoria Purman author, you'll see that I've been bombarding you with images of the book cover today and this week, and that's because I'm so excited about it. I'll go back to posting about my sewing and the dog very soon. The dog is just out on the other side of the door. My husband's away tonight, and she's feeling very lonely and put out. And now I've shut the door to the study, and she's beside herself. Really, she's a COVID dog, so she's had someone around all the time. And poor thing, she's just desperate for me to go out and sit with her. I might do that later, but talking to you is fun too. Dex, I might get you to put up the other image of the cricket match. I scoured the archives for photos of Hairfield Hospital, and I came across this one, and I just loved it so much. And I was just talking with Dex about this before we came on air tonight. Look at those four characters. I just love the nurse behind the wicket. If you're a cricket fan, she's crouched there ready to catch that ball. And you might look at the batsman and then realise he's got one trouser leg pinned up because he's lost a leg. Look at that look of determination on his face. And he's even got those sort of sticky out ears like young boys did. And he must be so young. But he's wielding that bat. He's getting ready to play. And then there's the person at maybe first slip, the guy at first slip with the like digger's hat on. He's got his arm in a sling. And then there's the other nurse at maybe second slip or third slip, who's laughing and joking. And I recreated this cricket match, actually. I imagined what it would be like, and I created a scene in the book for it because I just thought it showed the need to have fun that they had. And Hairfield was established originally as a place of recuperation and rehabilitation. And that got lost when they had so many. At one time, I mentioned it was 50 beds that started out. At one time, there were 800 beds, and they just had to put up basically sort of transportable buildings right throughout the property to cater for that many men. And so by the end of the war, 50,000 Australian troops were treated at Hairfield Hospital, and about 130 are buried at St Mary's churchyard. And as I mentioned, one nurse who died of the flu. And I have written about the Spanish flu at the end of the book. There's a few people have read it, you'll know, because it killed more people than the war did, actually. 50 million people worldwide are estimated to have died from Spanish flu. And I couldn't not include that because it really hit the hospital, and it hit soldiers, hit nurses, and was devastating. It was really devastating. So people were weakened by 4 years of battle and rationing and deprivation, and they just didn't have the strength to fight it off. And because I was writing that in the midst of sort of COVID, I was kind of thinking, what a way to end 4 years of war with a flu epidemic, which was so horrible. There were newspaper reports that people were dropping dead in the street in London from the flu, from the Spanish flu. And that was just shocking to me to make that comparison to about what was happening in Australia at the time. So yeah, there's a lot of history in this book. It's my biggest book so far. It's a bit of a whopper. You can see it's quite thick. But isn't that cover just beautiful? I just love it. And as I said, I cried. And you want to know something really, really amazing? I'm half Polish. My dad's Polish. The cover model contacted me on Instagram. She's Polish. She poses it's her profession. She poses for book covers in period costumes. So how's that for another connection to this book? It's just all kind of spooky, really. We're running out of time. I'm just going to scroll down and see if there are any more questions I can answer. Nurses' War has been on my pile for a long time. Oh, Anne Lee says, that poor puppy. I know. Poor Maisie. How many pages? It's about 600, Anne. But it flies. I'm told. Didn't fly when I was writing it. I do want to mention that I'm going to be in Victoria next week for those people in Victoria. I'm just going to check the dates again. My first event is on Tuesday. I'm just scrolling down on my phone. No, it won't. So here are my tour dates in Melbourne. I'm going to be at Frankston Library on Tuesday at 11 a.m. These are all on my website, my Facebook page. So scroll down, you'll see the post with the dates. Brighton Library on Tuesday at 2 p.m. Bunjil Place Library in Narre Warren at 7 p.m. Who was here from Narre Warren before? Oh, I can't scroll up. I'd love to see you at that event. Narre Warren Library, Tuesday, April 5th at 7 p.m. The next Wednesday, I'm at Leopold Library at 4 p.m. Thursday at 7 p.m. in the evening, I'm at Robinson's Books at Glen Waverley. And then on Friday morning, that's the 8th of April, I'll be at Mornington Library at 11 a.m. And Christina says, I'll see you at Robinson's Bookstore next Thursday, Melbourne. Fantastic, Christina. Please come and say hello to me and remind me of this, because it's so nice to see people face to face. Oh, there's your beautiful photo. I can see you, especially after so long when we haven't been able to. I have some South Australian tour dates as well. They're also on my author Instagram page. They kick off on Tuesday, April the 12th, the week after. But if you follow me, you'll be hearing about that. Wendy says, thank you so much for speaking with us tonight, Victoria. Love hearing what is behind the stories that became our books. Great connection to the cover. Oh, thank you very much. Tanya, who is your favourite character in your new book and why? Oh, you know, I think my favourite character is Gertie. I love Gertie. She's one of one of Cora, the nurses, fellow nurses, and I really love Gertie. And I have to say, I love Call the Midwife, and I love that beautiful camaraderie that they really depict in that show. I've been such a fan since it first came out, and I really wanted to portray to bring that feel of Call the Midwife to the relationships that the nurses have with each other, albeit in a very different era, but. It was so much fun. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I really appreciate it. I really loved your questions. And I'm sorry I haven't quite got to everyone there. Thank you, Better Reading, for having me. It's always a pleasure to talk to your book community. So passionate and such great readers. Every time I tune into Thursdays, what are you reading? I just have a list a mile long, and I know I'm never going to get to them because every week there's a new list. So thanks, Better Reading. Thank you, Dex, very much for being behind the scenes and coaching me through. I can't wait to see you all on the road. And if I open the door, Maisie won't come to the screen. She'll just stand there staring at me like, why aren't you sitting on the sofa now so I can go to sleep in my bed? But love from Maisie too. Thank you, everyone, for coming along, and happy reading.